Hello and welcome to E233. I'm your instructor, Gregory Myers. In this video, we're going to start a series of projects that we're going to group under a fundamentals demo. And the idea is that I want to get you the basics of the C programming language, navigating the command line, and a few other topics, sort of to get you off or started off on the right foot. Now, to begin with, this video assumes that you have correctly installed a version of NetBeans. Whether you use 8.2 or a newer version does not really matter. But as long as you have C support via MinGW. The second thing this video assumes is that you have downloaded a copy of my main template.c as well as the P1 sample. And so the idea here is rather than dwell on specifics about the C programming language or make this overly complicated, we're just going to simply jump straight into this and we're going to build our first program. And I've given you some additional instructions in class. And so essentially this is the solution, if you would, for this particular problem. And so what we want to do is we want to go ahead and begin a new project. So you go to File, New Project. You want to select C and C++. You want to go ahead and name this project P1. And you want to go ahead and select to create a main file. But you do want to change the name of the file to P1 as well. Also make sure that your drop-down box has C selected and that you have your tool collection correctly identified. You can technically do this after you've set up your project, but it's a lot easier to do this in the beginning. When you hit finish, you should see a new node in your project navigator, your project explorer on the left. And in that, you should see under your source files, p1.c. Now, we're going to let NetBeans do some of the work for us, but this default template isn't really all that elegant. It doesn't do a great job of documenting what we want to do here. And so that's the purpose of the main underscore template. So you can just slide this over to the right and you can split your screen. And you can see that what I've done is I've provided you essentially just a template, if you would, for the comments section. Now, a lot of this is going to be dictated in your professional career by your supervisor or the company that you work for. And for this class, though, I would encourage you to follow this particular documentation style. And so you can actually permanently change the license header by following the instructions at the top of the NetBeans file, or you can just keep this main template.c handy. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to copy and paste over the default template that was provided by NetBeans. Now, what you want to do is you want to change the file to whatever the name of the file name is. In this case, this is going to be p1.c. Because this video was recorded in 2021, the copyright is 2021, as well as the current date. You want to use your Blazor ID or some other identification, as well as your initials, and indicate what the purpose of this particular version is. And so we're starting off with version 1.0.0. As I make major changes, I will increment the first number. When I make moderate changes or significant changes, but not an overall rewrite, then I would change the middle number. And then the third number is just for bug fixes and minor revisions. Now, I encourage you essentially to increment the version every time you stop and start the project for a day or an evening, so you sort of keep track of your progress as you go along. This one's going to be pretty short and pretty straightforward, so we're just going to have one version of it. Secondly, you'll notice that I have a comment block here. Once again, this is a template. You can change it as you see fit, make it maybe match a little more your personal style. But essentially what I'm doing in this comment block is I'm indicating the name of the function. In this particular case, it's going to be the main, as well as the arguments that are provided. and a description for what this function does. And main is going to be your entry point for your executable. In other words, this is going to be the lines of code that run first when your executable launches. From there, we may find ourselves, and more than likely will find ourselves, writing additional functions. And that is the purpose then of this third comment block. And we'll see later on that that's how you would end up commenting additional functions as we go along. Now, you can go ahead and save this at this point. And then what I want you to do is I want you to take a look at the p1.sample. And once again, I've given you something similar to this in the instructions. This is sort of more of an abbreviated tutorial on how to solve your p1. You'll notice that the p1_sample.txt just has a little bit of information about myself. My first name, my last name, my Blazor ID, should you want to reach out to me, as well as my initials. Additionally, I've provided some information like some of the languages I've worked with in the past, what my goal is for this class. I guess you could say this is my goal for you in this class as well, what your professional goals might be, and when you plan on graduating, and then some information about your laptop. Now, this is an older laptop that I use specifically for this class, intentionally to demonstrate that you don't need expensive or high-powered hardware necessarily for working with C. But what I want you to do is I want you to use this as an opportunity to go through your computer's system properties and figure out some information about your computer. Now, this text file I've given to you, your information is going to be a little bit different than mine. And what I would want you to do now is in your main, you're going to use a series of print statements to essentially print your version of my sample. So, give you an example here. We start off with a printf, followed by some parentheses and double quotes. And then what I want you to do is I want you to type in exactly the way that I have it written in the sample file, your first name, colon, space, followed by your first name. And in this case, it's going to be Gregory, that's mine. Followed by a new line. That's what your \n is. We continue this, printf, last name, space, colon, and then space, followed by, in this case, my last name. Of course, this would be your last name. And then printf, Blazor ID, your initials, any languages that you may have already used in a prior course. Interestingly enough, or amusingly enough, I've actually had students put their foreign languages here. That was not the intention, although I guess you could argue that I wasn't specific enough. In this case, what I'd like to do is just list some of the languages that I've used. MATLAB, in this case, VB.NET, Java, and I've worked with a few others, but you sort of get the idea at this point. You want to follow this up then with the goals for the class. Once again, be very careful about the format here. This was intentional. And so I'm going to modify the goals from the template a little bit. My goal for this class is for you to get an A. My professional goals may be to get a good job as a software developer. So get a good job as a software developer. Once again, use this opportunity to tell me a little bit about yourself. For your graduation, it's going to vary a little bit depending on where you are in the program, but I would anticipate that many of y'all will find yourself graduating by spring of 2023. For the computer model, this is going to take a little more time. You want to investigate now what, for instance, the manufacturer and the model of your laptop is. So we'll, in this case, computer model, I'm just going to simply put to be determined. That's going to be your task. Followed by the computer CPU, which is the central processing unit. And also to be determined. That's going to be for you to discover. And then the amount of system memory, both the actual physical amount as well as the usable amount. There's always going to be a slight discrepancy between the two. And if you have any issues figuring out that information, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Now, at this point, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and build the project. But before we do that, we want to verify that our environment is in fact set up correctly. And so if I go to Tools, Options, you should see not only the C and C++ tab under the options, but also you should see a tools collection, in this case, MinGW, and you'll see that I have the path for the C compiler as well as some of the other tools associated with it. If you have not yet set this up, the next step will not work. So we go ahead and hit OK, and we go ahead and build. Now, the first time, this may take a little bit. There might be a slight delay, but if you haven't got any typos, you should see build successful in green. If you have not set up your environment correctly, or if you have a typo, perhaps a missing semicolon, then you will not get a successful build and you cannot continue beyond this step. So what I would suggest for you to do is to pause the video at this point and continue working on your code until you can get it to build successfully. Now, assuming that you have gotten it built successfully, what we want to do now is we want to go out to the command line to run it. Well, what you can do now is you can hit your Windows key and R if you're on a Windows machine and type in CMD. This will drop you in your current user profile root folder. From there, what you want to do is you want to change to the folder that you have selected to run or build your projects in. Now, at this point, you're probably not very familiar with the command line. You probably may have not even seen it before. In which case, I encourage you to go ahead and hit the Windows key and E. And at this point, you should pop up your quick access or possibly your documents, in which case you can then, through the mouse click, select the folder that you have put your project in. And you'll notice here that I've got a projects folder, P1, my distribution folder, debug, MinGW, and P1.exe. Now, you're going to first be tempted to just double click on your P1.exe. And if anything, it's going to come up very quickly and disappear. As a matter of fact, you probably don't even see anything at all. And that is because a command line application is not intended to be ran by double clicking. Rather, what we want to do is we want to navigate using the command window to this location. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out and do this step by step. And so I'm going to go back to the same location where I would be in my Windows Explorer. All right. And I know that I'm at the same location because if I type in dir in the command window, I'll see a bunch of folders that look roughly similar to the ones in Windows Explorer on the right. As a matter of fact, what we're going to do, I'm going to take a second and just go ahead and split my screen so we can focus on this. And if you recall, I was earlier in my documents folder. So what we want to do is we want to CD to my documents folder. Now, you probably noticed that I did that pretty quick. I just typed in CD and then DO and hit tab, and it auto completed for me. This is going to become a trick that you're going to want to learn so that you can maneuver through the file system very quickly. Once again, you also want to remember where it is we were storing our project information. In this case, it's in courses. So if I CD to courses, then I should get the exact same list on the left as I do on the right. As a matter of fact, if you type in dir, you'll see there's the same files and folders that I see on the right side. And I can continue into the 233 folder. So EE233, and you'll notice that if I tab, I get all of the EE folders. In this case, I want to tab back around to EE233. Also notice that Shift and Tab will allow for you to go backwards through the folders. And then when I type in dir, I get the same folders as on the right side. Now, at this point, you probably see the pattern. So I'm just going to go ahead and drill into a few of these folders. So I'm going to go into Projects, P1, Distribution, Debug, MinGW, and then I'm back to where my P1.exe is. Notice that as we were going through this, there was the P1.c in the root of your project folder, as well as some structure associated with NetBeans. This is where your source file sits. This is that P1.c that we were typing in earlier. And in the debug MinGW directory is where your executable sits. If you do not have an executable, that means one of two things has happened. Either your environment is not correctly set up, or you have an error in your source file, or quite possibly you just didn't yet build it. Over on the left side, I want to CD to my projects folder. I can now do multiple folders at once. In other words, I don't have to do a CD and a dir every folder. Instead, what I can do is I can go ahead and put the backslash in it, and then I can type in P1. I can type in dist or just di and hit tab, de and then tab for debug, and then lastly, MinGW Windows. And now when I type in dir, you'll notice that there is my p1.exe. Well, at this point, all I need to do is type in p1.exe, or simply just type in a few of the letters and hit tab, autocomplete. And now when I hit enter, all of the information that I had put into those printfs is now printed to the console or printed to the command line. So if you've gotten this far, and assuming that you have updated the information about your computer model, the computer CPU, and computer memory, then you are essentially done with your P1. There's one additional step that I would like to introduce you to that we will cover later on as well, and that is the ability to capture this output from the command line into a file, much like what I have given you as the sample.txt. What you want to do now is you want to type in p1.exe, and in this case, what you want to do is you want to type in the greater than sign. And then from there, we want to type in another file name that does not yet exist. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call it output.txt. There's nothing necessarily fancy about this name. And then hit enter. You should notice that on the right-hand side, there is now an output.txt in Explorer, as well as if you type in dir, you'll notice that there is an output.txt in your console. Once again, just different views of the same folder. You'll also notice the date and timestamp for both the executable and the text file. Also note that when you did this, nothing happened on the command line. Nothing was printed to the command line. Instead, what happened is everything was dumped into this output.txt. And if you double click on it, you'll see that everything that would have went to the command line is now being written to a file. This is referred to as piping. So hopefully you found this video useful. As always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me. Thank you for watching.